Hello everyone, my name is REVA Maraki. Welcome to this presentation on slips, trips and falls. I am a personal injury lawyer from the Justice Junction law firm, and I will be presenting to the group the Safe Shopper Association. The Safe Shopper Association consists of mainly personal injury lawyers, business owners in the retail sector, alongside members of society and academics. This group is focused on providing safe practices and solutions to supermarkets to improve consumer shopping experiences. So firstly, I will discuss key issues of slips, trips and falls. I will then critique the current state of law in regard to duty of care, breach, causation and some of the defences that can be used by supermarkets. Then I'll make recommendations for reforms. So in this visual graph, 23% of all injury claims are slips, trips and falls. 79% of those claims are from incidents such as slipping on wet floors, tripping over obstacles or losing balance. It's the most common type of falling incident in the retail sector, and that can lead to heavy financial costs on the individual and the supermarket, as well as impact the health and well-being of the individual. So physical injuries can include sprains, strains, fractures, head injuries, lacerations. Economic consequences can include medical expenses, lost income, increased insurances. Emotional and psychological impact can include fear of falling, anxiety and stresses. Long-term health might involve chronic pain and functional impairment. Duty of care in Australia is primarily established through common law, which has evolved through judicial decisions over time. This is true in negligence cases such as slip, trip and fall incidents in supermarkets. The concept of duty of care was famously established in the common law through the case Donahue versus Stevenson. This case introduced the neighbourhood principle, which means that a person owes a duty of care to avoid acts or omissions that can reasonably foreseeably cause harm to others. This principle laid the foundation for the development of negligence law. So in the context of supermarkets, common law requires that businesses take reasonable steps to ensure the safety of their premises. So these are the cases in our common law system that demonstrate how courts assess whether the duty of care has been met by evaluating the reasonableness and effectiveness of the systems in place to prevent the hazards. Systems that include regular inspections and cleaning, proper lighting, clear signage, and prompt attention to hazards such as wet floors, spilled products, or obstructions. These cases provide sort of an outlook on how far we can stretch duty of care. Razak versus Coles, the court held that it is not automatically a breach of duty just because someone slipped. In this case, the grape was on the floor for only 10 minutes, since Coles had employees checking the floor every 7 to 20 minutes. So this was considered a reasonable system, and no duty of care was breached. In the Strong versus Woolworths case, the High Court found Woolworths liable because Woolworths could not determine how long the chip had been on the floor for. So due to this, the court ruled there was a lack of system in place and therefore duty was breached. Considering it was a high-traffic, high-risk area, the court held that intervals for inspections every 20 minutes were necessary. The Woolworths versus McQuillan case, the Court of Appeal stated that workers need to keep a proper lookout for hazards, but not a perfect one. If a proper lookout is maintained, but a hazard is missed due to obstructions, it is not considered a breach of duty. Overall, the adequacy of cleaning and inspection systems is judged based on the frequency and effectiveness in preventing hazards, which can prevent injuries. You can claim compensation if a supermarket breached their duty of care. However, deciding whether a supermarket has breached their duty is a different story. When discussing breach of duty in negligence law, the concept of risk is fundamental. These cases illustrate a breach of duty of care in which we will discuss their similarities. In the Strong case, Ms. Strong slipped on a hot chip outside a Big W store owned by Woolworths, questioning the safety of the outdoor area. The High Court ruled Woolworths breached its duty of care by not ensuring the outdoor area was safe. The court emphasised inadequate monitoring and cleaning practices that led to the conclusion that Woolworths did not take reasonable care to prevent the accident. So in the Bulliat case, Ms. Bulliat slipped on a grape in a Coles supermarket, raising questions about the store's safety measures. The court found Coles failed to maintain a sufficient cleaning system, especially during busy hours. Their clean-as-you-go policy just does not work, and it's not enough to have a system in place, the system needs to work. So the common themes are that both retailers were found liable due to inadequate cleaning and monitoring practices that created hazards, and the courts established a duty for supermarkets to maintain a safe environment for customers. This subsection outlines key elements for assessing liability in relation to the risk of harm. So the foreseeability. The risk must be one that could be foreseen or anticipated. In this case, the hot chip should have been noticed during routine inspections, meaning the person responsible either knew about it or should have known about it. The significance. The risk must be significant enough to require action. Here, the presence of the hot chip posed a substantial risk, necessitating measures to prevent potential harm. Then we measure the reasonableness. A reasonable person in the same position would have taken appropriate precaution to reduce the risk. In this case, any reasonable person would have removed the hot chip to avoid injury. So we're using the strong case example. The failure to implement regular inspections allowed the hot chip to remain unnoticed. The risk was considerable enough to require action, and any reasonable person would have mitigated it by cleaning the hazard to prevent injury. Factors to consider for reasonableness. When determining whether a reasonable person would have taken precautions, the following factors are evaluated. Probability. How likely would harm occur without precautions taken? In the strong case, highly likely someone with crutches might slip and fall, but maybe less likely if it was someone who wasn't on crutches. The courts would measure seriousness. The courts measure potential severity of harm. In the strong case, it was quite a severe spinal injury compared to the Bulliet case where she fell on her shin. Courts would measure the burden. What is the cost or effort involved in taking precautions to avoid the risk? The cost of implementing floor inspections and cleaning inspections would cost employees time that they might not have in a high traffic zone. They would also measure social utility. Does the activity that creates the risk provide significant value or benefit? The benefit of preventing injuries, as outlined in key issues, is a significant benefit to the community by implementing safety practices that include floor inspections and cleaning systems. So under Section 10 of the Civil Liability Act, there are 3 subsections. 10A focuses on the burden of taking precautions, and this emphasizes that the duty to take precautions against a specific risk of harm means that you also have a duty to take precautions against similar risks. So in a supermarket, if a store has a duty to address the risk of someone slipping on a wet floor, they must also take precautions for other similar hazards. Subsection 10B, alternative methods of avoiding risk. The fact that a risk could have been avoided by doing something differently does not automatically establish liability. The court will look at whether the method used was reasonable in the circumstances rather than comparing it to a different solution that could have been employed. So if a supermarket chooses a specific cleaning schedule and a customer slips, the fact that a different schedule might have prevented the slip does not by itself mean the supermarket is liable. And the key question is whether the existing system was reasonable. Subsection 10C, if a business takes corrective action after an incident, it does not mean that they were negligent beforehand. So if a slip and fall accident happens one day and then the next day the supermarket decides to go and add preventative measures such as PA announcements, more signage, more preventative measures, then this does not make them liable beforehand. Causation is a fundamental component of negligence claims. Section 11 of the Civil Liability Act outlines the general principles for establishing causation. So now we need to link the risks to the injury caused. So under subsection 1 of section 11, there are 2 parts, and the first part talks about factual causation, involves the but-for test, which is sort of like a domino effect. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a harm caused without a breach of duty. So we're tracing the injury back to the person making a mistake. If a customer slips on a spill because an employee failed to clean it up, place a warning sign, then we can establish factual causation. So the second part, scope of liability, considers whether it's fair to extend the defendant's liability to the harm caused. So if we're continuing with the spill scenario and there's a back injury that we don't know about or a pre-existing injury that we don't know about, our scope of liability, it might not extend to cover those additional harms. So there is a case, Thompson versus Woolworth, where a contractor moved her bin and it made her back injury worse. So she was still expected to take reasonable care of her own safety. So subsection 2 talks about contributory causation. So suppose an employee fails to clean a spill because there are other contributing factors like poor lighting or a crowded aisle. Then the court might still find causation satisfied under subsection 2. Mostly because if there's more obstruction blocking a potential hazard, then you need more systems in place. So subsection 3 talks about judicial discretion in determining causation. So if a supermarket chain has a systemic issue with safety compliance resulting in frequent accidents, then the court might find it justifiable to hold the supermarket liable for injuries caused by such breaches. So the following defences are most relevant. So obvious risk under section 15. If a person slips on a wet floor marked with a warning sign, it may be considered an obvious risk. I mean, the sign's right there. This defence expects people to take care of themselves, to keep a proper lookout, and to avoid the risk of injury from features which are clearly apparent or a matter of common knowledge. So an obvious risk is something which would have been obvious to a reasonable person in the position of the injured person. So voluntary assumption of risk. So this could apply under section 14. This could apply if, for instance, someone deliberately walks on a slippery surface despite warnings. This defense is less commonly applied in supermarket cases because customers are generally not expected to voluntarily accept the risk of slipping or tripping. However, it could be argued in situations where a customer disregards rules, such as ignoring wet floor signs. So under section 24, contributory negligence, if someone was not paying attention while walking or running in an area known to be slippery, then they might be partly at fault for their injury. So in the case Fitzsimmons versus Coles, the court found that the plaintiff 50% contributory negligent for failing to heed the wet floor signs positioned around the puddle of water on which the plaintiff slipped. Some of the reforms I would like to recommend are public awareness campaigns. Supermarkets could collaborate with corporate bodies to create posters, social media campaigns and in-store announcements highlighting safety practices and encouraging vigilance among shoppers. Standardized incident reporting. So a development of a digital reporting system that staff can use to log incidents, which can be reviewed on the regular to identify patterns and areas needing improvement. Enhanced safety auditing and inspections. Regular unannounced inspections by trained safety officers to check compliance with safety protocols such as proper placement of warning signs and prompt removal of hazards. Also, mandatory safety training for employees. Introducing a compulsory safety training module as part of an employee induction with annual refresher courses to keep safety knowledge up to date. In conclusion, duty of care in supermarkets is about maintaining a safe environment through effective systems for hazard management. Courts evaluate whether these measures are reasonable, not perfect, based on each unique situation. By understanding and applying both common law principles and the Civil Liability Act, supermarkets can better protect themselves and their customers. Ultimately, it's about balancing safety with practicality, ensuring that everyone's welfare is considered.